Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webcast, Diversity of Thought in Corporate Culture, Building a Winning Team Through Idea Inclusion, sponsored by Humantelligence. This webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI and SHRM credit. Please be sure to complete the entire webcast in order to receive your credits. If you have any questions during the webcast, click on the Q&A tab in your webinar controls and type them there. I'll post a link to the slides and the exit survey in the chat area once the presentation has started. A new tab will open in your browser with the webcast survey. Please be sure to complete it as soon as the webcast is ended. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to our presenter, Juan Betancourt.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to jump in here too. My name is Charles Summers. It's my pleasure to be serving as your moderator today. My goal today is to make today's webinar as interactive as possible. So we've gone ahead and added a few fun polls into the discussion today. Also, if you have any questions at any time during today's presentation, please use Zoom webinar questions queue. When it makes sense, we'll jump into the questions as we go. We also have a 15-minute Q&A at the end, so you can put your questions in there. If you'd like to reach out to me about any Humantelligence related questions, webinar questions, or future webinar topics, feel free to reach out to me directly at charles.summers@humantelligence.com, or you can just chat me on LinkedIn here. You can see it on your screen. To set the stage, Humantelligence is the leading culture analytics and recruiting for best fit solution. Our scalable SaaS platform accurately measures culture and provides talent insights to optimize performance, recruit for both culture fit and predictive success at the individual, team, and corporate level. Today, we'll focus a lot on how measurement and data lend to eliminating bias and improving diversity of thought. We believe that meaningful culture begins with measurement, so we'll talk quite a bit about that and how data can help you with some of these things. Today's presentation is based on research conducted by HR.com and Humantelligence, measuring over 500 HR executives. You'll actually get a copy of that ebook. There's about 40 pages in that ebook containing the research that I just mentioned. So I'll go ahead and send that out after today's presentation. Also, because this webinar is a part of the HR.com virtual conference, stop by our virtual booth and leave us your business card. And we'll make sure, and if you do that, we'll set you up with a free culture mapping for up to 20 people. So, if you're interested in doing a little culture mapping exercise, drop your card in that virtual booth, and I'll make sure to follow up with you directly. So without further ado, you can see Juan here on the screen already, but I'd like to hand things off to Juan, our CEO here at Humantelligence. And I'll just highlight some of Juan's background. He's held many executive level roles, including his time as CEO at Decathlon USA, CMO and strategy officer at Puma, spent time at Siebel Systems and Procter & Gamble as well. In terms of Juan's background in HR, he's the founder and CEO of an executive search firm, Gonza Executive Search, and spent time working with Korn Ferry. He holds degrees, bachelor's from Harvard, as well as master's degrees from Wharton and Lauder Institute. So Juan, I'll go ahead and kick it over to you here.
Thanks so much, Charles. Perfect. So today we're going to highlight the following areas. The presentation is going to be broken up into understanding culture versus engagement. A lot of companies and human resource executives are confused about the difference and the distinction and when to use which. They're both very important, but there's a lot of blurriness that we hope to give some clarity to in this thought leadership piece today. We're going to talk about measuring culture, because once you understand what culture is not, and you get more clarity, you can now finally understand how to measure it. And once you can measure culture, just like we all know from all well-run supply chain organizations, if you can't measure it, you cannot improve it. So if you're not measuring your culture, you're not going to be able to improve your culture, okay? We're then going to go into diversity in recruiting. Okay, and how diversity is not just race, religion, color of skin. The highest form of diversity actually is diversity of thought. So if you have a company that needs to solve problems, I think all 190 of you on this participant group should raise your hand there. Every company, that's what your goal is. Solve problems, achieve a goal or a mission of your organization, okay? If you need to do that, you need diversity of thought. Unfortunately, 92% of leaders hire people who they like, okay? Not based on data, okay? Not based on the best fit for the role or the best fit for the organization, but based on who they like. And we'll explain, once you measure culture, you can also measure diversity of thought. Pretty powerful concept, which is now a reality. People talk about the future of work, but the future work is already happening today through technology applied to HR. Okay, and then we're going to end with keys, the research that HR.com did with over 500 of you HR executive leaders, the great insights that we got from that study. We're going to summarize those keys to having an inclusive culture. So, is your company more likely to hire a likable candidate? This is a poll question. A likable candidate or the candidate that is best suited for a role? I'll let everybody answer that question before I come back.
And we'll give everybody about 20 more seconds here or so.
Okay, as you can see from the poll, 41% mentioned that people are probably hiring more likable versus 60% who mentioned that they're probably hiring best suited. Now, the reality is we all want to believe that we're able to make the decision to hire someone who's the right fit for the role versus who we like the most. But imagine this scenario. 5 finalists, they all have great resumes. Any of them can, quote, do the job, check the box on the job description. They come in for the Super Friday or Super Saturday. Your team interviews them, or your HR business partner on the other side, the business leader and his or her team interviews them, and they all get together at the end of the day, and they all like Mary over, let's say, Steve at the bottom. But the reality is, what if it's a marketing team that needs to be really creative? And in the case studies during the interviews, Mary answered the same way that all the people on the existing marketing team answered. They would all love Mary. What if John was kind of contrarian and pushed back and had different ideas? He probably wouldn't have done so well in the interviews. And I bet you, and this is what the research shows, it's really hard for 5 people who agree that they like someone the most to go and hire the one they like less, just because it's going to lead to diversity of thought. Okay, so this is a real problem in companies. And without data, you can never validate or not validate that last poll question. And so now with data, you can actually see if people are just hiring who they like or hiring for cloning people or diversity of thought. So when companies or managers lean on their own biases instead of clear measurement tools, diversity in the workplace suffers. And this has been shown through all research. Go ahead, Charles. So what can we do? The goal of successful recruitment practices should be to hire for culture fit of new employees and retain current employees through engagement efforts. Of course, we all know that, okay? And when culture fit is prioritized over bias, science builds diversity into our processes. So the future work is now, and you can actually start doing that through technology. Go ahead, Charles. So let's talk about culture. This is a slide that 50% of people say, wow, aha, I get it. 25% push back on a few elements, and 1 in 4 of you is going to look at this and have organ rejection, okay? And that's okay. So what is culture not? Let's start with that on the left side of the screen, okay? Or at least my left side of the screen, okay? And by the way, all these things on the left are really important. I'm not saying they're not important. I'm just saying they're not in the calculation for what culture you have, right? Culture, you need a culture to achieve your mission and goals, right? So culture is not your vision. So when someone says, yeah, we are Exxon delivering energy to support people's lives around the world, okay? That's the vision. It's not the culture, okay? You would need a culture in that organization to support that. Okay, mission, okay, whatever the mission of the company is also not the culture. Benefits, a lot of people say, oh, but we give free yoga Mondays and we give pizza on Fridays and people can work from home on Thursdays. That is not your culture. You could have two companies, one a manufacturing organization, one a marketing advertising group. And just because they give the same benefits does not mean that they have anything to do with each other in terms of culture. And so benefits are not your culture. They're important, but they're not your culture. Engagement surveys, this is where it starts to get, where people start to think, wait a second, we've invested millions of dollars in engagement surveys to measure our culture. I hear that all the time. The reality though is engagement surveys are just getting a pulse of how people feel at a certain time, a certain day of the week. Okay, an engagement survey does not tell you if you have the right people in the right job to achieve the goals and the strategy of the company. Let's say that your company gave everybody $1,000 worth of credits to go to Disney World with their family. That week, everybody would be really happy in engagement surveys. People would love the company, recommend it to a friend, and yada, yada, yada. The reality, though, is that does not mean that you have people who are succeeding in their role to deliver the best customer service, to do what the company needs them to do. It is a false premise to believe that happy employees lead to happy customers. Happy employees lead to a great culture, okay? So this is a mistake that a lot of companies make. Another data point around engagement surveys, even though we've had engagement surveys now for about 5 years where you can scale them and give them to everybody, and now we have pulse surveys every week, every month, okay? Engagement in the United States has gone down every year for the last 5 years. So despite 1 billion engagement surveys, how does one explain that engagement continues to trend down? They basically are not having an impact on engagement. Another data point you should think and reflect on is when your company gives an engagement survey, and by the way, they're important. I'm not saying don't do them, but just don't confuse that with culture. That's the point here. So another data point, when you give engagement surveys to, let's say, 5,000 employees, can someone explain to me how that actually improves the engagement between any two of those employees? No one, I've talked to 300 CHROs of the Fortune 1000 in the last few years. No one's actually been able to explain how that improves engagement between people. And the last point of engagement is that points out that it might not have anything to do with your culture. Many of you, I would guess, Charles, make a note to make this a poll question before the slide, next presentation. But many of you, how many of you have used an engagement survey in the recruiting process, the results? So have you used the results, the insights, the key findings from an engagement survey? Because if it's about your culture, if it actually has anything to do with your culture, then of course you would actually build that into your recruiting process to hire for culture fit. Of course you would. The reality is, I would argue and bet, because we've done this poll at conferences with over 1,000 HR execs, not one of you has ever used the insights from an engagement survey in the hiring for culture fit. These are all very powerful data points as to why engagement surveys are very important, but should be distinct from what you understand your culture is. Leadership, this is the one that's most confusing for people. There's been a dictum for the last 50 years that culture trickles down from the top. That, you know, your culture will be what your leader is, okay? The best example that I can give that's recent that shows that this is not so true is the following. The Uber CEO was a womanizer. He harassed people, and he basically was written up in all the newspapers as a horrible person, horrible leader, etc. And they said that Uber culture was horrible because of that, the whole culture of the company. They then fired him, and within 6 to 7 days, a week later, the newspapers came out and said that Uber had a wonderful culture. Now, the reality is Uber has 24,000 employees. The culture of Uber around the world did not change overnight because they fired the CEO. The 24,000 people, the Uber employees in Singapore and Brazil, their culture did not change at all. So reflect on that for a second, okay? The leader is gone does not mean that the culture, the way the company operates, whether they're structured, have processes, totally creative, if things work, don't work, that did not change just because. Please give me 1 second. I apologize. I just had a baby 2 months ago. It's my wife's first day back at work, and the nanny canceled on us. So I have a crying infant in the background. So for all the parents out there, I appreciate giving me a hall pass on that. So Uber example about the leadership. Leaders would love it. Jeff Bezos would love it if his 200,000 employees all were just like him and all thought like him and had the culture like Jeff Bezos. The reality is, the culture does not trickle down. If you have 20,000 employees, culture trickles up and across. Your employees are what make up your culture, not the 10 people. 10 people do not outweigh 20,000 people. Now, everybody wants culture to be aspirational. And sure, you should all have an aspirational culture, which you define at the top, which you hand out in booklets, which gets put on coffee mugs, which gets put on screensavers, which gets memorized for engagement surveys. I'm sure all of you monitor how quickly your employees can recite the culture of the company, right? The reality is that's great to have, but now with the future work, you can actually measure if you actually have that in your organization. And that's not through an engagement survey. An engagement survey does not tell you if you have people who are like the culture you want. Now, what is culture? And this is where the aha moment should come and where it's measurable. This is the future of work. Okay, work has always been the IQ, intelligence, resume, and skills. That only leads to 30% predictive success. So your companies are operating at literally a subpar 70% because they've never been able to measure and improve the EQ, emotional intelligence. And what is that? Your culture, and if you want to remember it really easily, is BMW. It is your people, their psychology, so people, psychology of your organization, matched within the framework of the work environment they create or establish. And it is measurable, 28 things across these 3 things that we kind of just call the BMW framework, which is you have behaviors of your people, okay? And that is measurable today, whether they're stable or change-oriented. You have motivators of your people, whether they have values around being service-oriented or innovative. And then you have a work environment. Think about your own company. Is it one extreme, completely systematic with Six Sigma, continuous improvement, so many healthcare organizations and clinical trials and manufacturing have that kind of extreme structure, proven methods, procedures, and other environments like Apple, like developers, like gaming companies are completely what the other group would think is chaotic with minimal routine controls and lots of creativity every day. This is your culture, and today it is measurable. Go ahead, Charles. So let's clarify the confusion on the one part that people really get confused, right? Culture versus engagement. So culture is an organizational value and behaviors that contribute to the unique social and psychological environment of a business within the context of a style of work environment. Engagement, okay, is the discretionary effort that employees are willing and often eager to put into their work. So if any of you follow sports teams, okay, you could have a team like the Patriots, okay, who could have a bad day, okay? They might be great and they have a culture of performance, but they, on any given Sunday, they could have a horrible day and not put in that discretionary effort. It doesn't mean that the culture of the Patriots changed. It means they didn't perform that day. They weren't happy. They were tired, okay? Culture is long-term and hard to change, but yes, today measurable. And engagement is something that is kind of changeable and literally you have a bad meeting and your engagement could go down the afternoon. That does not mean the culture of that group is going to change. And how they work together, because this is important. Again, we're not stating, and all the research shows that they are both important. It's not that you should get rid of engagement surveys, but just understand better when and where to use the information. Okay, so Engagement will depend on the cultural fit between the employee and the organization. And the better the cultural fit, the higher the engagement. So if you have somebody in a job that's really creative, but the job is an assembly line role, engagement's going to be low. Okay. And that's a culture mismatch, culture fit mismatch. So by choosing candidates based on culture fit, you can incorporate engagement into the onboarding process. Give me 1 second.
And Hester, while we wait for Juan here, let's go ahead and launch this next poll question here.
Yeah, go ahead and do the poll.
Okay, so we have a two-part poll here. So does your company currently have a systematic and scalable way to evaluate for culture fit, other than subjective interview process of, do I like this person? I think they will fit in. So that's a yes or no question. And then if not, how can you know a potential hire will fit into the culture? So if you could answer those two questions, and you know, if not, put your comments in the chat box here.
Yes, the second question is an open-ended question, so if you could please answer in the chat box, then the presenters will have your answers there.
Okay, go ahead and close the poll up.
Charles, I don't see the results to the poll.
Okay, yeah, so to the question, does your company currently have a systematic and scalable way to evaluate for culture fit other than a subjective interview process of, do I like this person? I think they'll fit in. 80%, so 74 people, 80% said no to that. So they do not have a systematic and scalable way.
Great, thank you. Is this another poll question, or is this the same one? I'm seeing the slide, Charles, with the, does your company currently have a way to evaluate for culture fit?
So we're moving on to the next slide here.
Perfect, great. So measuring culture, what happens when we don't do it? When you don't measure culture, you can't improve it. You can't identify where you have weaknesses. You can't understand why people perform. Why are 3 manufacturing plants having 20% more defects than the other 10 manufacturing plants, losing $5 million a year? Well, there are case studies now, companies like us, other companies, where you can go in and explain that, oh, the culture of these people in this manufacturing process are extremely decisive. They just make decisions too fast. They're not reflective, or they're not team-oriented. They're too selfish, and so they're breaking down on the team batch manufacturing process. Another example that comes to light is trucking companies. There was a trucking company with 3,000 employees spending $1.5 million more in gas, yet they drove the same distance. Turns out that the culture of those 3,000 versus the other 7,000 truckers, they were much more decisive. They would bang the gas pedal at red lights when they turn green with a 10,000 payload, spending more gas on the acceleration point, as well as when they pass on highways. All this company did was put a catalytic converter on the gas pedal, so that these really extremely decisive, like, let me just go now type personalities, the culture of fast didn't hurt the business. And so they were able to identify culture of performance, culture of lack of performance, fix it, and save 1.5 million. So measuring culture allows you, if you don't do it, the results are bad hires, low engagement, miscommunication, high turnover, cultural misalignment, and poor management. And Zappos CEO said that he lost $100 million because of that. Now, measuring culture, let's get to the gravy of this meal, okay? All of these problems are rooted, okay, in people, okay? Culture will explain why certain Starbucks stores perform over other Starbucks stores, okay? Because everything in Starbucks is completely uniform. For those of you who travel a lot, the Starbucks in Iowa, Boston, Miami, Sao Paulo, Brazil, Lagos, Nigeria, and Shanghai, China. You walk in and it's the same artwork, same furniture, same CD-ROM they're selling, same aprons, same cups, same training, same software, same coffee, same everything. The only thing that describes the difference or explains the difference, if measured, is the culture of the people. Okay, and by the way, I just realized the chat box was not on. So if you were trying to chat with Charles and I, it is now on. So feel free to list your questions or any responses, and Charles will take note and we'll address them at the end. Thank you. So all these problems around culture, okay, around companies, around performance are rooted in people and how they differ in personalities when they interact. Okay, so team culture, store culture, local culture is really important. So we propose, and the market is moving the future work to using science and automation to better understand candidates in the beginning stages, because you don't just fix a culture of a company, you hire your culture. Okay, so it leads businesses to interview only promising final options that show a true cultural match and which are more likely to perform and succeed. So instead of using the subjective bias of pure phone screens and interviews, use data to get to your final candidates before you start interviewing them. Only 50% of HR professionals can actually describe the culture of either their teams or departments. This is one of the insights that came out of the HR.com study. And think about this, and go do this with your companies. Go do a survey of all your team leaders and ask them, what is your team culture? Ask them, open question, what is your team culture? They won't know what to say. They're going to default to the company culture, but I can assure you that your accounting and finance department team at your company guarantee has a different culture, different behaviors, work styles, and values than your marketing team, than your sales team, than your account, than any other team. Okay, Charles, next.
Yeah, and I have a kind of a relevant question here that came in from the audience, so I'll just ask it now because I think it fits here. Virginia asked, how do you distinguish culture from the values of the organization?
Great. So go back up to the slide, Charles, if it's easy to do, to the 4 bubbles where we list out, if it's fast. Great question, Virginia. I guess it's not that fast.
This one?
Okay, yeah, this one. So on the BMW framework, the motivators and values, that is the values of a company, okay? So often in a company, you could have a certain set values, okay? And that's good to have, okay? And those values are basically what motivates people at a deep psychological level. So motivators, values, those words among behavioral scientists are used interchangeably. Now the problem is, those values that are set at the corporate level, that's great, but you also need behaviors of your people. And so behaviors are different than values. And work styles are different than values. You could have a company that's all about customer service values, belonging, team-oriented, right? But do people shoot from the hip when they present proposals? Do they walk into meetings unprepared? Is it kind of like laid back, millennial, hipster? Or is it a structured environment where you do your homework before meetings, where you only present suggestions with proven methods and research? You could have two completely different cultures at 2 companies with the exact same values. So values are only 1/3 of the picture. So, Charles, you can go back down to the other slide as I finish this comment. So, Virginia, great question. Values are a good start, but values do not explain operational performance at all the different areas of your company. Okay, you need to understand the behaviors and the work styles of people as well. Okay, so measuring culture. Currently, there's ineffective techniques. There's climate surveys, engagement or pulse surveys, turnover rates, and employee assistance program usage, right? Those are kind of capturing symptoms, but not really getting to the heart. Because if someone quits a manufacturing job is they're a creative person. Well, their engagement's low, their turnover, they quit, they fire, but that doesn't get to the actual answer, which is they're a cultural mismatch. They're a creative person in a job that needs someone to be very assembly line and structured and a very boring job for them. It's like the trucking example. There was a company we worked with where 40% of truckers were late every single day, right? They lost, I think, 30% of their revenue of clients because the truckers were always late. And what they ended up finding out, the truckers were miserable on their engagement survey, but they couldn't understand, well, why? The why is the culture. The engagement on whether people are happy or not is the output. The why ended up being the truckers were miserable. 40% were actually chatty box people who loved working with people, who loved being belonging on teams. And here they are in a truck, in a job that did not match their culture fit. And when they got to the stop to deliver the payload of the truck, they sit and talk for 30 minutes to an hour instead of unload the trucks. So again, turnover was high, performance was low, and these truckers were miserable. It had nothing to do, the engagement surveys didn't explain why. It only explained a symptom. The actual cause was a cultural mismatch of the behaviors, values, what we call motivators, and work styles of that trucker or those truckers and the role they were working in. Okay, next slide. And Charles, as I read the slides, I can't see the chat. So if there's any good questions, either hold them to the end and just remember to go back, or you can interrupt me if it's relevant at the moment and I can answer them. Okay.
Okay.
So measuring culture. Okay. Engagement surveys are used by 50% of organizations in an attempt to measure culture. And over 1 billion engagement or pulse surveys have been taken in the US in the past 3 years, with zero impact on engagement levels, which are still at 30%. And some people say going down. If engagement surveys really had anything to do with culture, why hasn't anyone ever thought to use their key findings in the recruiting process for hiring for culture fit? Go back and ask your CHROs, or if you're a CHRO, reflect on that. These methods really aren't telling the full story. Go ahead, Charles. So the problems with these common methods on attempting to measure a culture that may not have been communicated, they do not show differences between perceived and actual culture. A lot of them are opinion-based, not data-driven science, but just opinion. Just because you ask your employees if they're happy or not, and you get their opinions, it doesn't mean it's a data-driven. That's a qualitative perception versus a scientific data of what the culture is of the company. So these things do not explore factors like behavior, personality, or work styles that are underlying the perception bias. And this is the true foundation of your company's culture. And they do not change, by the way. Your culture does not change week to week or month to month. So giving more and more pulse surveys and chasing all the answers and tabulating all the results and all the energy and all the work you put into that, you might try to think if that's really worth it and impacting the performance of a division. Is that really impacting the operational performance of a group? These methods also don't get to the heart of the problem. What is the emotional intelligence of an individual, a team, an organization? Beyond self-assessing tools or engagement surveys, how does engagement between employees or teams and groups look like? What is the EQ of a team? Are you guys looking at the emotional intelligence of teams? Now with the future of work, you can measure emotional intelligence of a team and look at the emotional intelligence of your leaders. And so these tools do exist. It is measurable. It's no longer a soft science of feel. Leadership soft skills are becoming hard skills. Go ahead, Charles. So diversity, let's now get into the diversity quotient. Yes, diversity is race, religion, culture, geography, educational backgrounds, but it's also at the highest level of diversity of thought. In the survey by HR.com, they found that 69% of HR professionals say that their organization sometimes hires likable candidates who turn out to be a poor fit. Many of you, myself included, and I was the youngest partner at Heidrick and Struggles. I was one of the top billers at Korn Ferry. As a partner, I ran a very successful private equity focused executive search firm. you know, at the end of the day, I would put in people that I liked, right? And all the research shows that you usually go with people you like. And when I had to fire people in my organizations, which happens, we all make hiring mistakes, I would call in that person, let's call them Charlie, and say, hey, Charlie, come in, close the door. And it would usually be about 3 months in. And I'd say, hey, Charlie, and I'm sure a lot of you can commiserate with this. Charlie, close the door. You know what, Charlie, I think you're a great person. I really like you. We've liked you since the interview process. The team likes you. You're a great guy. Your values really match the company. But you're just not performing. It's just not working out. Unless there's a riff and an economic reason for firing, 90% of people get let go, okay? It's not because they didn't get hired for skills. They get hired for skills, but they get fired for fit, okay? Culture fit is key, and that's why it's not as easy for Coca-Cola to go and hire a top salesperson from Pepsi and just slot them in at Coca-Cola in the same territory, because that same person with the same intelligence, same resume, same experience, all of those things are worthless when it comes to the more powerful thing, which explains 70% of performance, which is culture fit. Does that ex-Pepsi person fit into the Coca-Cola culture? And vice versa, you could use the same example for Coca-Cola going to Pepsi. I don't mean to offend anybody on the call who is either Coca-Cola or Pepsi. The same analogy could be made for a BCG consultant going to McKinsey, or vice versa, or a Merck Pharmaceuticals person going over to Bristol Myers Squibb in their R&D group. Same person, same role, same intelligence, same resume. Success, failure, only explanation is emotional intelligence and fitting in with the culture of that group. Go ahead, Charles. So what does the data say? Nearly 2/3, 63% of responding HR professionals say their organizations value diversity of thought, but few organizations assess employees' work behavior or cognitive styles. This makes it difficult to evaluate diversity of thought or to assess good matchings of teams to understand internal conflicts caused by differences in cognitive styles. Okay? There are tools out there called self-assessment tools many of you have used, but 90% of them that are 10 to 15 minutes only measure behaviors. They're not measuring motivators or values. Now, some of them do. So SHL, Hogan, Lominger, they do measure that. But now you're looking at 45 minutes to an hour, 50-page reports that are like $500 that you have to also pay for a consultant, right? And have a workshop, right, which costs $10,000, only given to the executives. And by the way, your executives are the last people who actually need to learn self-awareness. They got there because they already have it. The other 95% of employees don't have access to tools to measure values. But now our company, Humantelligence, and a few other competitors are now creating these motivator measurement tools, these value tools that you can quickly give in 12 minutes to your entire organization for a much lower price. And then you should also check and make sure that these tools measure work styles. What kind of environment does someone like working in? This will lead to understanding if your people are going to be engaged and happy or not just their psychology. Go ahead, Charles. Diversity in recruiting. So steps to eliminating this bias and improve diversity. First, when you're hiring and using tools for recruiting, measure before you give anything to any candidates or applicants. An assessment result by itself without context or talent insights about your existing workforce gives you no insight. First, benchmark and measure your current culture of the team that you're hiring for, the leader, the team, and any high performers in that team. Make sure that it's not just behavioral, but also values-based or motivation-based and work style-based. Create a best fit profile for the role before you give it to candidates. Given the insights from the benchmarking, what is the best fit, the best person that you would want for the role? Do you want to clone the high performers and not have diversity, or do you want to guarantee diversity of thought? Make that a data-driven strategic decision before you go down the road of interviewing people. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a very subjective, biased process with no diversity when people just hire who they like. Okay? Leverage technology and data-driven AI, not only to source candidates, but to filter their resumes by also their EQ, their personality. All it takes is 12 minutes with certain tools like ours and other companies out there. The practical application, what does a strong culture actually look like? How can we best see, or how can we see best fit in action? How can science filter out the wrong candidates that aren't improving cultural diversity? We're going to show you just very simple screenshots of different platforms out there that you now have access to. And for organizations of 10,000 people, it only would cost you like $50,000 to finally solve the understanding your culture, to improve performance in every part of your organization, lower turnover by 10 and 20% for literally the cost of losing 5 people. Go ahead, Charles. So here's an example of a divisional culture mapping or a corporate culture mapping of a company. If you see there above the bubbles, this example, there's 199 people in this team. And this is a group culture analysis where under the red circle, key traits, this team, through data, the company now knows that they have 41% or dominant freedom. They value creativity or following established procedures, and they like to bring ideas and adapt to change. 23% are quite unique. They like to challenge conventional thinking and appreciate unique perspectives. Now, this would not be the right culture for a manufacturing plant. Okay, this might be the right culture for a consulting firm or a advertising agency, but depending on what your division, your team, or your company is trying to achieve, you would have a culture roadmap. And so now you can have not only product roadmaps, but technology roadmaps and culture roadmaps. And this is the data to measure to see if you're on the right path for that roadmap. Next slide. Here you can use culture mapping and data insights, and this is kind of like the movie Moneyball from Brad Pitt a few years ago, where baseball teams use insights about players and data to better draft, in our case, an HR recruit, and then putting teams together to perform on the field. In our case, the workforce, putting teams together to perform in your business. So imagine comparing on the left the high performers in sales with the low performers, okay? Getting insights that the high performers on the left have values or motivators for financial security, self-reliance, and influence, whereas the low performers are more focused on being motivated by knowledge, helping, and belonging, okay? So you can use this information now as a company. Instead of firing low performers like we've been doing for 50 years, you can use this across the motivators. There's also a light tab there next to motivators, a behaviors tab, and a work styles tab. You can get all these insights and now develop your low performers instead of fire them. You can make sure that your team is aligned to your 3-year vision on the products, services, and culture roadmap. You can make sure you can develop them. And then you can use this insight to hire people for this predictive success. Charles? Keep going, Charles. I think we've seen the slide. You can also use it for retail stores, bank branches, manufacturing sites. Pull all the data for 400 employees in a Best Buy and all the Best Buy stores or all the Starbucks stores, and pull out the top 20 stores and compare their values and motivators with the bottom 20 stores or the bottom 20 manufacturing plants. Compare the behaviors. The insights are so powerful, it will explain 90% of the time with large populations why people or groups perform. Go ahead, Charles. So case studies, companies leveraging culture analytics and talent insights for diversity of thought in recruiting specifically. Go ahead. So there was a furniture manufacturer, one of the largest in the world with over 20,000 employees, that learned that the high performers on the left were more extreme helping than the low performers, and that the low performers really cared about money and financial security on the right. And so what they ended up doing was using a test and got rid of 10,000 interviews a quarter. So 40,000 interviews. Imagine the time, and imagine 100% turnover on 20,000 employees. They got rid of 10,000 interviews a quarter and just used an assessment tool to hire people who did not focus on money, but focused on being part of a team, being supporting, and being helping. Back to Virginia's point, these are key values or motivators that explain performance throughout all the manufacturing employees. Go ahead, Charles. Give me 1 second. Of the 238 participants, this little one's not participating by the rules. I'll be right back. Charles, could you explain this page, please? I'll be right
Yeah, so I'll just jump in here. So we've had a handful of just some questions come in here in the chat window. So I see a handful of questions just about the slide deck. So we just put a link to the slide deck in the chat box. In my follow-up email that I'm going to do after this presentation, I'm going to put the slide deck in there. I will also send out that 40-page report that a lot of this data is based on, so that you all have access to that. I'll also send you a link to the recording as well. So yeah, just to answer some of those questions here, just going back through some of these other ones. Yeah, so I've got a comment here from Paul. So he mentioned some multinationals like AIG and D&B were excellent in hiring and cultivating effective cultures, in part reflective of diversity of their existing workforce. So good examples, Paul. So Juan's example here is kind of similar to that. Basically going in and mapping the current culture, looking at those behaviors and motivators and the work styles, and taking that to the recruiting front so that they could hire for best culture fit. And so AIG and D&B were able to do that as well. So those are good points you make there. One, I was just going through some of the Zoom chat. There was a couple of questions in there that I could handle. So I'll kick this back to you to go back over the slide.
Perfect. So here's more data on that furniture company, where also the behaviors, so we talked about values, motivators, where there were differences. The behaviors of the high performers, they found in the low performers on the right, they were too decisive versus the high performers thought and were more reflective or deliberate before making decisions. Also, if you notice, they were extremely steady versus the low performers who weren't very steady. And so those were key attributes that explain the culture of performance, right? So an engagement survey would never lead to results to understand why people are performing, okay? It would just tell you that the low performers are unhappy and they're not making money, and so they're pissed off and they want to quit their jobs. It's not going to help you improve the performance of your company, that engagement survey, whereas understanding the culture will actually help you in HR impact performance and profitability in every single one of your lines of business. This is the power and the difference that you should take away. Measuring culture impacts your profitability. Measuring engagement just tells you people are pissed off or happy. Very different impact on a business model. Go ahead, Charles. We can skip this page. I already spoke about what this is. So key takeaways using the data. Establish diversity of thought in your culture. Okay, culture must be defined, then measured. A candidate that everyone likes might not be the best fit for a role or for long-term team performance. Diversity brings greater innovation, particularly when diversity of thought is conveyed respectfully in a trusting environment. Charles, can you take the next slide? I'll be right back.
So we're getting pretty close to the end here. We've got a couple more slides. So just to finish it up here. Another couple of key takeaways. Higher performing organizations are more likely to value diversity of thought, 88% versus 41% for low performing. So those higher performing organizations are valuing diversity of thought. So and that's some of the research that'll be in that 40-page white paper that I'll send out after this. But higher performing organizations are more likely to assess individual and team cognitive preferences and work styles. So 3 times as likely on that. So I'll jump over to this summary slide here, Juan.
I'm back, Charles. I'm good.
Yep.
And for all the 236 people on the call, I really appreciate the hall pass on the child thing. Our nanny canceled this morning, or the first day my wife goes to work. Anyways, in short, Companies that value conducting more meaningful assessments, so not just behaviors, that's what everybody does today, but you're not getting the insights that you need with also values, to Virginia's point, which we call motivators, and work styles. Okay, getting assessments that cover those three areas will help you understand and address inclusion, performance, and diversity of thought. And as we all know, what gets measured improves, including diversity. If you knew that 12 minutes out of your day could improve that diversity and performance and understanding of your teams, wouldn't you make the time? And emotional intelligence makes all the difference today, okay? The world is moving to a business world where emotional intelligence is as important as skills, resumes, and what school you went to. Next.
Yeah, so that takes us to the Q&A portion of our webinar here. So I'll start going through some of these questions here, and my Q&A pop-up window isn't working, so Hester is putting them in the chat box for me, and I'll read them off here as they come through. So definitely get your questions in now. We've got about 10 minutes to go through some of those questions, and I'll start reading them off here. So one person asked, where can I take the 12-minute assessment? And so you can actually just go to the Humantelligence website, and there's a button right on there that says take the free 12-minute assessment. So you can go ahead there, and I'll actually put that in my follow-up email as well, so you can have that there. Question from Cynthia: where can I get the 28 steps?
I think she means the 28 measurements or the 28 criteria. Yep. Why don't you email Charles? Behavioral scientists have come up with 28 variables broken within these three buckets of behaviors. There's 8, motivators, there's 12, and work styles, there's 8. We at Humantelligence did not come up with that. This is universal truths that every scientist in the world agree with. We, for instance, just came up with a test to measure them, but whether you use our tool or other tools, that doesn't matter. Charles can send you that list of 28. So Charles, if you don't know where that is, we have a document that explains all 28. Let me know, but have them reach out to you and I can send you that.
Yeah, absolutely. I can coordinate that. Pat asked, how could this relate to a nonprofit children's hospital?
Nonprofit children's hospital. So one of the things that we've worked with healthcare companies is, a nurse is not just a nurse, My wife is a doctor, and so I know hospitals quite well. My uncle's a plastic surgeon, grandfather's a heart surgeon. So there's a difference in culture performance. The behaviors, the motivators, and the work styles of an ER nurse versus a pediatric nurse are completely different. And within pediatrics, are you dealing with, a children's hospital where, like St. Jude's that's dealing with cancer patients or something? That's a very different profile. So you can also get insights as to the right type of nurse and who's going to stay longer and perform better in that environment. Also in hospital, and we have a lot of dental clients for some reason, at hospital and dental clinics, the office manager is like this crazy role that determines everyone's happiness. Regardless of the doctors, if you have 3 doctors in a practice and 5, 6 nurses, that office manager is the key linchpin to the culture of that office and how it operates and how it works and whether people are engaged or not. And so using this tool for office managers has been a really powerful leveraging of understanding culture and insights, even at nonprofit hospitals. So I hope that answers that question. Next question.
Yep. Is culture likely to be more perceived in a structured bureaucratic organization like government versus being actually practiced in a more profit-oriented private organization?
That's a great question. We're doing a test with a group within the CIA, a group within the Marines, and a group within the Air Force. Unfortunately, the cycle is going to take 18 to 24 months for them to be able to get approval to buy a tool like ours. So those organizations, the nonprofit, the government, they're interested in it. I'm just not so sure that they have a motivation to leverage tools like this, because you have employment for life. You can't move people around as easily. You can't kind of do an audible and adapt and have career mobility in nonprofits and government as you can in for-profit. Now, one area which surprised us where we're getting a lot of traction are universities. So imagine using these kind of profiling of what leads to high-performing students and engaged students at a university and saying, oh my gosh, we shouldn't just look at grades, right? And even when looking at grades, you have usually 10 people who could check the box for the grades. How do you pick the one of the 10? Well, go look at the ones who succeed in the culture of economics at Princeton versus the culture of science at UC Berkeley or, in music at Howard University in Washington, D.C., and see what succeeds, what doesn't, and then leverage this to let students in that are going to be more happy, more successful. And so there'd be a better kind of e-harmony for matching for all students applying to universities. So this kind of technology is going to become more prolific in all areas of life, not just for-profit businesses. Next question.
Great. So we've got about 5 minutes left. Keep the questions coming. If we don't get to it, we will definitely follow up with you via email or give you a phone call after this webinar. So Juan, do you see beliefs as a part of culture, worldview, source of truth?
Wow. Whoever asked that question, you're past my pay grade. I wish my chief scientist was on the call. He would have a better answer. I'm going to try. Your belief systems, your worldview are impacted by your values, okay, and by your behaviors. Probably not by your work styles. But so your worldview actually doesn't impact your behaviors and values. Your behaviors, values impact your worldview. So you could use tools like this to identify belief systems, right? And so, for example, to make it more concrete, if you believe in giving back to the world and, you're more liberal in your political stances and having a social safety net for education, for healthcare, right? Let's say that were your belief system. In values, you're probably more of service and belonging to things that most behavioral scientists believe are values and motivators of people. Then you are independent and focus on money, financial security. So even a tool like ours would be able to pull out and identify those belief systems. And it's not that the belief system impacts the values, your values will impact your belief systems. And same thing with behaviors. I think people who are steady and deliberate and reflective understand kind of the gridlock of government, right? And I don't know, I'm using the government example, maybe it's on everybody's front page of the stories. But if you're really decisive and change-oriented and a millennial, you might get frustrated by the bureaucracy of government and how long things take in government and probably stay clear of kind of positions in providing service to government. Next question. And I know that doesn't give justice to your question, sir or ma'am, whoever that was. So, but great question. Next question.
Yep. So question from Gene here, and it's a little bit longer one. So in order to get a better understanding of diversity and thought within HR, with a goal to presenting one unified face to the business leaders we service, what steps do you recommend we take? For instance, how do we ensure we have an appreciation of diversity between groups?
Well, so there's two. I'm gonna cut diversity into two things. One is race, religion, ethnicity. Our company does not dabble in that at all. We have found we dabble more in diversity of thought, more on the psychology, diversity of psychology and work styles. Both are equally important. Some clients of ours have found that 5 white women actually have more diverse thinking and psychology than a completely diverse racial ethnic team and gender team. So, but the key point here is there is no right or wrong answer that a company should prescribe to you. You need to measure it. So companies should measure the diversity and the racial, ethnic, gender of their companies and put programs in place, obviously, to make that more equitable, but also using data like psychology to see if if there is diversity of thought in psychological trends and work styles, because that also could really improve your business performance as much as racial and gender and ethnic diversity. Next question.
Perfect. So I think this is actually a good stopping point for us since we're right on the hour. So there are probably about 15 more questions here that have come in. So I'll make sure that in the follow-up, we get you in touch with somebody that can answer the question.
And
go
Charles,
ahead, Juan.
Can you chat the group my email real quick? Can you write my email to a chat so they can all take it down and email me directly?
Yes. Yep. So it is. Okay, so I just put it in the chat box there. So feel free to reach out to Juan directly or myself. So his email is juan@humantelligence.com. Mine is charles.summers@humantelligence.com. Feel free to reach out to either one of us. We have another webinar coming up next month with hr.com as well. So hopefully we see you there. We'll be at our booth all day long today. In our virtual booth on hr.com's website for the virtual conference. So you can also reach out to us there today with any questions that you have. So appreciate everybody's time, and thank you so much.
Thanks you, everybody. My little daughter, Aura Davey, also thanks you for your patience. Bye. Have a good week.
I'd like to thank our presenters and the baby as well, and as well as all you for joining us today. If you'd like to view the webcast again, the recording will be available on the website tomorrow. The credit will show in your hr.com account within 2 business days, and we'll send you an email also with your credit information. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment to fill out the exit survey that opened in a new browser page on your computer. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.